Hello and welcome to Unit 1 Physiology. We're looking at topic D here with the environmental factors during sport and exercise. So the learning outcomes for this lesson, we are identifying high altitude and what it's classed as, explaining the responses of the body to high altitude and analysing those responses using exam questions. So why is learning about altitude important in sports science? Have a think about that question. So completing this table then, see if you can fill in your ideas. What do you think the definition for the following responses would be? Why does it happen? Give me the science. Explain your answer. Keywords in the box on the left-hand side. See if you can answer those questions. There's 5 minutes here, so pause the video and have a go. Okay, back in then. So let's have a look at your definitions, and in the right-hand column, I'd like you now to add some additional info if you have missed it. So the first response to altitude is hypoxia, and this is due to insufficient oxygen available for the tissues or body. So it occurs when the body becomes short of oxygen, and acclimatization does not occur due to the decrease in oxygen levels within those muscle tissues. The second response to high altitude is increased breathing rate. So the higher we go, the much more difficult it is to breathe because there's less oxygen available due to partial pressure. Okay, there's a lower partial pressure. This means that hemoglobin carries less oxygen at altitude when compared to sea level, so we compensate by increasing our breathing rate so that more oxygen can be taken in and extracted, increasing that volume of air in the lungs and alveoli. So this can also be referred to as hyperventilation, so that occurs due to an increased ventilation of the lungs due to that partial pressure being decreased at high altitude. Our third response is increased heart rates. So altitude increases that heart rate to over 100 beats per minute. This can be known as tachycardia, and this increase happens because of increased blood flow, and our body's trying to speed up delivery of oxygen. So high altitude can also decrease that maximal heart rate, and as a result lowers the cardiac output, so the amount of blood the heart pumps through that CV system in a minute. Then we have altitude sickness as a response. So the higher we go in altitude, the more likely we are to suffer from altitude sickness. So this is an illness brought on by a fast ascent to high altitude, characterised by shortness of breath or a shortage of oxygen leading to exhaustion and nausea. So it's important to make sure that the ascent to high altitude is carefully managed, otherwise you could suffer from this sickness. So what other symptoms do you think can occur if you were to suffer from altitude sickness? The answer would be the following based on your exam. So headache, dizziness, exhaustion, nausea and vomiting, or a nosebleed. Okay, so this question asked for 2 symptoms that could occur due to altitude mountain sickness, and 2 of these would need to be listed. And finally, the final response to high altitude is reduced VO2 max. So remember what VO2 max is. It is when we can't consume any more oxygen. Okay, we're at the top end of our oxygen consumption and it plateaus, okay? So if the measure of oxygen you can consume and use in 1 minute is VO2 max. So it's a significant impact of endurance events at high altitude. If we don't acclimatise, then VO2 max can drop to 5 ml per kilo per minute. And at this level, an individual will not be able to exercise at high altitude because there will not be enough oxygen in the body to supply for working muscles to provide nutrients. So the responses then, a nice little memory hook here. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 responses that we need to know of. First one, hypoxia, is that insufficient oxygen. If we're suffering from insufficient oxygen, hypoxia, that's going to increase our breathing rates because we need to increase the amount of oxygen we're bringing in. Increased heart rates, Okay, again, we need to increase the amount of oxygen within our blood and transporting that oxygen. So therefore we increase our heart rates. Obviously, if those symptoms occur, those responses occur, we're going to feel a little unwell. That's going to cause altitude sickness. Okay, have a think about those symptoms, make sure you know. In terms of the symptoms, just think about when you feel sick, what symptoms would you suffer from, and list those symptoms. I'm going to feel a bit sick. I'm going to have a headache. I'm going to feel dizzy. Okay, and there's many others to choose from. Finally, that last response reduces VO2 max and performance. Quite simply, if you're suffering from all of those responses, your performance is going to be decreased, therefore reducing your VO2 max. Okay, so have a go applying to exam questions now. What do you know from altitude? So defining high altitude, that is 2,400 meters or above. Can you state 3 initial responses? So the responses would be increased breathing rate, increased heart rate, reduced VO2 max, altitude sickness. Okay, state the meaning of the term hypoxia. We're looking for insufficient oxygen available or lower levels of oxygen than required. Explain why athletes may become hypoxic in response. At high altitudes, lower partial pressure of oxygen, therefore harder to extract oxygen from the air, which means there'll be a lack in the amount of oxygen reaching the tissues. So why does resting heart rate increase in response? To increase blood flow, to speed up delivery of oxygen, okay? And finally, 2 possible symptoms. Like I said, imagine how you feel when you're sick. List those symptoms. Okay, perfect. Thank you.